Well, my name is Phil Heimlich. I'm a conservative Republican with libertarian leanings, and I'm also a follower of Christ. I call this podcast the Radical Middle. I started doing this podcast because I know that many of you don't have the time or the inclination to read up on all the news. So, what I do is I try to take important issues and boil them down and give you the key facts in a few minutes. Okay, I've talked about the war in Ukraine before, but here's an update. And you should know first a little about the history of Ukraine. In 1922, Ukraine became part of the Soviet Union. The Soviets took over all the farms of Ukraine, and get this, they starved to death 5 to 7 million Ukrainians. During World War II, the Germans invaded Ukraine and killed 1.5 million Jews. That's a quarter of all the Jews killed in the Holocaust. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became an independent country. But when Vladimir Putin took over as leader of Russia in 1999, he decided that he wanted to rebuild the Soviet Empire. Now, he did this by sending Russian soldiers without Russian uniforms, they called them little green men, to attack Ukraine while at the same time claiming he had nothing to do with it. Then in 2014, Russia invaded an area of Ukraine named the Crimea. They say that he annexed it, which means he sent his troops in, but nobody fought them. In 2022, Russia launched a full scale invasion of Ukraine. Since the war started, President Biden brought together all the NATO countries, most of which are democracies, to come to Ukraine's defense. None of these countries, including us, sent troops, but we provided massive military aid, which helped the Ukrainians fight off the Russians for 3 years. You know, it's interesting, but the two countries in the world that have supported Russia are China and North Korea. In fact, North Korea has sent 10,000 troops to help Russia fight Ukraine. So far in this war, there have been over 1 million casualties combined on both sides. And make no mistake, every death, every wounded soldier in this war is because of Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. President Biden's position was that it was critical to stop Russia because if we let them take over Ukraine, then Poland and other countries that were part of the Soviet Union will be next, and maybe he'll attack Western Europe after that. President Trump, on the other hand, has always been very friendly to Putin. In fact, he's called him a genius. When Trump came into office this year, he cut off aid to Ukraine. And if you can believe this, he blamed Ukraine, the country that was invaded, for starting the war. Trump says that he just wants peace, and he asked for a 30-day ceasefire, which Ukraine agreed to, but Putin would not. Since then, Russia has continued its merciless bombing campaign in Ukraine, which has killed massive numbers of civilians. Now, just this week, Trump offered a peace proposal, and he and J.D. Vance are pressuring President Zelensky of Ukraine to accept it. The problem is Trump's proposal gives Russia everything they want. They get to keep all the areas that they invaded and are now occupying. Ukraine doesn't get to join NATO, and Ukraine gets no security guarantees. So, in other words, there's nothing to stop Putin from resuming the war in a couple months or a couple years. Essentially, this proposal by Trump rewards Russian aggression and allows an ally of our country to be essentially conquered by the nation that invaded it. It's equivalent to Neville Chamberlain in 1938 handing over Czechoslovakia to Hitler in return for peace. I think we know how that turned out. These are the facts. You decide where you stand on the issue. I'm Phil Heimlich, and this is the Radical Middle.